Hi there everybody. Today's video is about my mediocre potato harvest. This is my very large, or last year it was my very large jumping worm infested bed. This is 20 by 8 feet, and last year when I harvested my onions and potatoes I discovered the jumping worms. So this spring what I did, I cut this up into basically 4 different beds. In this bed here I had planted onions. They did very well. Then I put a cover crop of buckwheat in there. Suggestion from Steve in the garden. Thank you, Steve. And that's coming along quite well. I planted that maybe 2 weeks ago. 3 weeks at the most. Something like that. And this is where my potatoes were. And then over here, I've got a 2 smaller beds. They're about 2 feet each. And in the middle of this I have a arched cattle panel, and I have birdhouse gourds, and there is a cardinal nest up there. They got the babies now, and Mom and Papa very busy. I better get out of here before they dive bomb me again. And on this cattle panel I've got birdhouse gourds, I got some melons, and been harvesting a lot of pickling cucumbers, Boston. And then on this side I have, well, this is kind of interesting, I have sweet potato flowers there, see? Yeah. This is my sweet potatoes this year. But back to what the purpose of this video. This is my 2023 harvest of potatoes. And I pulled all the potatoes yesterday, but prior to that I probably pulled, I don't know, maybe a dozen, maybe a dozen and a half potatoes for eating, because I'm an impatient gardener. And then yesterday I pulled everything, and I shot a video and then my camera died. So it helps when you put it on the charger to have the charger plugged in. Anyhow, what I wanted to illustrate here quickly was that, like I said, this bed was 20 by 8, and last year I discovered the jumping worms. And what I did this year was I created a berm along the inside perimeter of these beds with shredded leaves. And then what happened was, once the soil temperature reached the mid-50s, the jumping worms started migrating towards the wet leaves that I had put along these interior perimeters. And from that point on, up until about the beginning of July, middle of July, I was removing hundreds and hundreds of these immature jumping worms. But the good thing, when I harvested these potatoes yesterday, I found one. And when I harvested the other ones over the last few weeks, I found 3 or 4. And the really good news to me is that in the onion bed, I didn't find one jumping worm in there. And I even dug around after I pulled the onions, I didn't find any. When I harvested my onions, sweet potatoes, the russet and the red potatoes last year, I found dozens upon dozens. Every time I pulled a plat, there'd be another half a dozen or more jumping worms, mature jumping worms. And the other thing too that was very good was that the worms I did find were immature. So this is a definite strategy in a raised bed situation to get the jumping worms out. And I just have this berm here of leaves. After I pulled everything yesterday, I laid this in here to see if I'd get any more worms. And I dug through here earlier today, and I found a couple. but I may have just attracted them from this pathway, because the jumping worms are not just in my beds, they're all over the place. And so anyhow, this is basically a solution, or at least something a gardener can do in a raised bed for the jumping worms. And actually, even if you had in-ground beds, you could create a berm of shredded leaves along the outside of your in-ground bed and do the same thing I did in these raised beds. You will collect them. And the biggest thing to me was to get out as many as I could before they reach maturity, because they're parthenogenic, meaning that they can reproduce without a mate. So one worm you can end up with, and I've never found out how many cocoons these guys drop. So and the other nice thing was that last year when I harvested my potatoes especially, my soil was just this coarse granular material, and now it's returning to the soil that I created over the last 4 years. It's nice and loomy. It was so disheartening to see what the jumping worms in 1 year did to my soil last year. But I'm reclaiming it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a soil sample, send it to UW, and then I'm going to plant a cover crop of clover. And I think I'm going to let it stand over the winter. And next year I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with the potatoes. But one thing I do know is that I had 4 rows of potatoes in this bed, and the 2 rows on the outside were not as good as the 2 center rows of potatoes, because when I was digging through the leaves, I was disturbing the roots of these plants that were out here, and they did not do as well. I might even consider using grow bags in here next year. I'm not sure yet, I haven't decided. But I'll take a soil sample, and then in the spring I'll do another soil sample with the cover crop of clover and see if it return much nitrogen to the soil or not. But that's about it. So here's my mediocre potato harvest of 2023. I don't know, I'm guessing I might have 20 pounds of potatoes here, and we probably have eaten maybe, I don't know, 10 pounds. So and this is about a third of what I normally plant for potatoes. But since I had to cut this bed up to gain access to do the baiting, I didn't have as much area to plant in. So, but it was something, and I got some potatoes. They're not going to last me through the winter for sure, but they're really good, and they're kind of like a tomato in the sense that the difference in taste between a homegrown potato and a homegrown tomato from the store compared to a store-bought tomato or potato, I'll take these any day. So I hope this is informative to anybody that's dealing with jumping worms, and have a good day. Bye now.